Hi, I'm Alicia.
And I'm Robin, and you're listening to Bowel Moments,
the podcast sharing real talk about the realities of IBD. Served on the rocks. This week, we're bringing you our very first research roundup, where we bring back some of our past professional guests to discuss the latest and greatest in IBD research. We're joined by Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Anish Patel, who's the medical director of the IBD Center and chief of the Division of Gastroenterology and Hepatology at the Brooke Army Medical Center. And we're also joined by Dr. Ashish Patel, who's the Division Chief of Gastroenterology and Hepatology at Phoenix Children's Hospital. Cheers.
It's Robin, and I'm here with Bowel Moments. And my co-host.
This is Alicia. I'm also with Bowel Moments, oddly enough. We are very excited to bring back a couple of our best guests. I shouldn't say best guests because that makes all the rest of the people feel bad. But you guys have been some of our most downloaded guests. So we will give you that. And also you're just wonderful people. So
yes,
we are joined again by Dr. Anish Patel and also Dr. Ashish Patel, because we just really want to confuse people. And also I just love my Drs. Patel. So I'm so glad to have you guys back. Welcome. And thank you for being our first trial guests for Research Roundup. Woohoo! Yay. I feel like we should have like a shooting guns right here.
Yeah. Fireworks, something.
And I feel like it's fitting since you're both Texans, right? So I feel like this is perfect.
Yes.
For sure.
We have, you lived in Texas. I've lived in Texas. It does feel appropriate.
It feels appropriate.
I still live in Texas.
You're the only one now.
You're the only one that still lives in Texas.
Everyone else abandoned me. Especially Ashish abandoned me now. Now he's even hotter now.
Yeah, that's true. They're about to turn on the oven over here in Phoenix.
Yeah, gross. That is gross.
It's just gross. But
are we drinking tonight?
Oh yeah, we're drinking tonight. Well, some of us, sadly.
Some of us are drinking.
Yeah. What are you drinking, Robin?
Vodka soda with a little splash of cranberry and lime.
Sounds delicious. Nice. What about you, Anish?
I promised when we were in the email, I was going to get a nice cerveza. I could not find any good ones, FYI, because they're all generic stuff. So I went old school, back to my roots from Pennsylvania, and decided to go for Yingling.
Nice.
Nice.
And I'm drinking it in a post May the 4th be with you mug. As no one's in a podcast, it is a Darth Vader
mug.
It. So I went classic.
Ashish, what are you drinking? Are you drinking anything?
It's a little bit earlier here in Phoenix, so I just got out of the OR, and I have to give a quick shout out to the OR staff that actually got me out of there. So Dr. Yermalina, Shannon, Heather, Nicole, Tommy, they rolled through our cases today and got me to this at 2:30, which is awesome.
Oh, thank you guys. We thank you. Bowel Moments thanks you.
If this was after 5, I actually wanted last time I did a beer, this time I've been really into doing Negronis, the gin-based cocktail, Bacardi and gin, and that's what I would be having, but instead I'm having a Coke Zero.
I mean, still good, still delicious. I'm having a Mexican mule today, although I'm almost out of tequila, so I need to buy some more tequila. So Mexican mule for me today in my Astros cup, because the Astros are about to play the Twins, and I will be wearing Astros gear and probably getting my butt kicked. So. Or just Minnesota. Lots of people yelling cheater at me, probably.
It's Minnesota. No one cares about the Twins anymore.
They're just going to passive aggressively be mean.
Kirby Puckett's not there anymore to make fun of. So you have no Kirby Puckett, you have no Twins. I mean,
they don't allow drums in Minnesota, so that's why the Astros are going to lose.
Well played.
Oh, shut up. I'm going to take you off this call. Listen, I have control of the Zoom. I shall kick you off. All right. Well, this is not a sports podcast, oddly enough. And pretty sure Ashish would want to talk about basketball instead of baseball. So we shall move on. And so the whole idea of Research Roundup is that we want to talk to our providers about what's new and exciting in the research world for inflammatory bowel disease, because it changes so fast. And we know that all of our IBD patients are so versed in this that we want to bring the latest and greatest to you. So we're going to start out by something that has been in the research for a while, but we want to talk about biosimilars, because I know I'm hearing from patients that this is something that's becoming very relevant to them. So let's start out by just talking about, for the folks that may not know what a biosimilar is, can one of you take what is a biosimilar?
So as the treatment for inflammatory bowel disease really evolved and we started using biologics, which were the class of drugs that anti-TNFs like Remicade and Humira are listed under, that really evolved the treatment of inflammatory bowel disease, both Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. And what we realized, very early on, and even still today, that the costs of using those medications is very high. And so the idea of biosimilars came about, I think, first with some push towards trying to make this class of medical therapy more affordable to the patient as well as to the healthcare system. And so because traditionally, you and I think of like a generic drug, right? So a generic drug is like, I can go buy brand name Tylenol or I can go buy generic acetaminophen, right? They're the exact same drug. One is a brand name and one is a generic. The difference is that here with biologics, particularly with anti-TNFs, the parent companies still own the copyright or whatever you want to call it of the original, the originator drug. And the drug is made through developing like from cell lines. They produce the antibodies. So they own it. So someone else can't just go and take those and make the antibody. But what they came up with was that they created a medication, the biosimilar, that has the exact same effect as the originator drug, but it's not the exact same compound. It's kind of shades of gray there, but it's very important in the sense that it's not called a generic, but it is called a biosimilar. And in that sense, that led to kind of the debate that Anish and I have probably had with families and payers and patients and parents and everybody about what does this mean for our child? And if they want to change it, what happens? What's been your experience with that, Anish? Like when you start having that discussion?
Yeah, first off, that's probably one of the best ways I've heard to explain biosimilars, because it's very tough because you literally, everyone says it's a generic and it's not. It's not one-to-one the same. It might somewhat look the same shape, but it's not exactly the same molecule. Essentially, what really the big difference also is too is whatever added compounds that are in there to keep it mixed are also different. That's the other thing to remember too is like, Remicade and their biosimilars, they may look similar, but what they're mixed in also can be different too. So that's the other big difference that you see between biosimilars. Again, cheaper products. These are cheap, and that's where kind of Ashish was going to, and I'm glad he kind of went that route. Is that it is the whole goal of biosimilars is to make the market cheaper. My experience, I'll tell you, the military with us, we're 100% biosimilar. So we're looking at around 2019. This is when, and I'll just use brand names. It's just easier. So we got approached to start flipping to Renflexis. Okay, from Remicade. So we actually did an initial study, which actually was abstracted and we'll actually be publishing here soon. We saved, at least our institution, $2.5 million in 1 year. Okay, just by going to it. Now, the clinical experience hasn't changed. Like I flipped a lot of people from Remicade to Renflexis with no issues, no increased flares, no antibody formation, no issues with their disease state. And from then on, everybody now across the board gets Renflexis first off. And I have not seen a clinical efficacy drop or anything like that in the adult population at all, period. Are you starting to use more of it in pediatrics there?
Yes, it sort of came through us through the adult data. And then we always hung on to this like last rope that, hey, well, you can change everybody, but you can't change kids.
Yeah.
And they let us hold on to that for a little while. But even now, it has infiltrated down into pediatrics. And I have your same experience. We have been asked to change patients that were on one to a biosimilar. And we have done it safely and successfully in my experience. We haven't had any major issues or concerns. And even in pediatrics, again, like Anish said, a lot of the data came through the adults like it always does. But you are seeing stuff out of Europe over the last 2 or 3 years where they talked about pediatric patients being switched and being done safely without any issues. And again, they have, maybe, universal healthcare or bigger health systems. So they say, okay, similar to like what Anish can do is like, hey, our system is going to use this. And so we used to fight it a lot and we don't fight it anymore. If the insurance company says, hey, this is the approved biosimilar, then we'll allow a switch. Now, another interesting concept has come up, and I don't know if I'd love to hear your experience in the military system, but there's some now, what we're starting to face is certain companies are saying, oh, this year was Renflexis, and then the next year turns over. Now they're like, oh, well, now our deal is with Inflectra. And so then they're like, oh, now you got to switch again. And there was a recent paper, again, talking about multi-switches and also saying that at least in the early data that there wasn't an issue. But it starts making me a little nervous as you start, changing medications, a little bit haphazardly, I think.
At least in the Department of Defense, where I'm at, they haven't mandated multiple switches. So you said you went from Remicade to Renflexis. Now, if you look at the different side, the VA, their funding line, different segment, they did the same thing you're just talking about. They initially went from Remicade to Inflectra, and then now got a better contract with Renflexis. So now you're doing the triple switches. So you're essentially going from one to another to another. It's a nice segue because the paper, the one that we kind of looked at in reviewing is obviously European data. The nice thing is the Europeans have had these drugs for, 10, 11 years, have had these drugs and have great experiences with it. The paper, I'm actually looking at right now, it came out of the Netherlands, looking at this, what you're talking about, going from like Remicade to biosimilar, or from two biosimilars, or from Remicade to two different biosimilars. And you do see it. My concern is not, Europeans have done this already. So for them, it's safe, effective. They don't see a cross-reactivity. There's no efficacy loss. So you're not seeing people flaring from things. My concern with the multiple biosimilar switches is that, why are you doing it? I think that's where my always big problem I have with that. Yeah, it becomes a money thing. Is it really a big difference? If I go from Inflectra to Inflectra, is there a big price difference? I honestly don't know. In the DoD, I'll tell you, we did not go Inflectra because the cost savings between Remicade and Inflectra was useless. But then when you go from Remicade to Renflexis, there's these huge cost savings for the DoD. So we did do it. Again, my switch was not like okay, sounds good. Next infusion, you're going to get Renflexis. We did a graded switch. So anybody who was on more than a year Remicade, they got switched automatically. People who were just in induction, they didn't get switched until 6 months later. All new starts were Renflexis. So that kind of mitigated some of these multiple switches or excess switches. Again, like I said, we get lucky. We don't have to do multiple switches. But the data is supporting it. I think part of it too, at least in my experience in being part of committee chair for CCF and government affairs part, it's more of the forced switches. I think that's and Ashish, I think you can talk about that more than I can because I don't have 4 switches, but it's that you get a letter from an insurance company, your patient's going to get Remicade on Monday, but Friday you get the letter saying, nope, they're going to get whatever it is, Inflectra, Renflexis. But then, by the way, you have to get prioritization again.
Right.
You can't just roll over to it. So I think that's where, part of it is I think education was not very good in biosimilars, period. And we literally had this conversation, myself and Alicia, before we started, and Robin, was that, is it because Americans don't want to buy into it because a lot of people are bought by pharma, as opposed to Europeans who are forced because they're part of the government. So it's all got, so I think there's a big issue. I think the rollout of biosimilars, my own personal experience, the rollout of biosimilars was awful because essentially it was like, here's Inflectra, start using it, and you don't have any education, information, or anything like that. These companies have done better now. Companies have done a little bit better educating the providers, the patients. So I think that's rolling out now. If we have what we did now, I don't think it would be a big issue. But I think from a payer standpoint, I think, and that's why I think you can expand on it better than I can, was that your experience with these 4 switches and the hesitance of patients. Obviously you're doing with children. So for you, is a little bit of a higher threshold of how you want to switch or not switch. The adult sector, again, 18 and above, we're going to do it because we have the data there. But for your realm, it's a little bit different because you're not doing you're not doing the children, you're doing the parents too. Where did your comfort come from? Like, how did you end up becoming, outside of the big Cadillac insurance telling you, look, Ashish, your ass is grass. You're switching. You're done. We're not going to get the drug, period. But where did your comfort level come from? And how did you navigate a lot of those things?
Yeah, and that's why we did sort of fight it at the beginning and say, okay, that pediatric patients should be excluded because it was happening exactly how you said. And sometimes, like you said, days before their infusion was, and sometimes we weren't even being told. It was like, okay, well, it's gonna be switched on the back end, or there's some sort of discussion with the pharmacist or whatever, and so that became very frustrating for us when we didn't know, we didn't have as much faith in the biosimilarity of it, the equivalence of it, right? And so that has just become, for me, a little bit of both time and hearing this European experience and other places where it was being done more rapidly and safely, and that was what I think was important. We deal with these class of drugs, these biologics, and this is again really highlighted or really magnified in pediatrics. There's all this safety stuff, and you can't, you used to tell us, I can't use Remicade on that person, doesn't have a pediatric indication. You can't use Humira. Even now, these new medications, they don't have pediatric indication. And then you turn around and roll out this drug called a biosimilar that had no clinical testing, doesn't have any, there's no studies associated with it. And they're like, oh yeah, use it. It's the same thing.
There you go.
It's cheaper. And they're like, wait, the reason you're telling me to use it is because it's cheaper? And meanwhile, the originator companies bend over backwards about safety and 20-year registries, about databases, about monitoring. And then, the other companies come, and basically with the biosimilar, you can use the biosimilar on every indication that the originator has. And so, it was a great potential entry point for companies that weren't even in the biologic market, right?
Yep.
Because originally it was several companies, it wasn't the originator companies that were making these, it was all these other companies that wanted to get in on that medication. So I think for me, back to your original question, experience, hearing about it, then utilizing it. I mean, I think in pediatrics in general, we're early adopters using medications that are not approved in pediatrics, often in our more serious or more sick kids with IBD. And so some of it just became sort of listening and learning and trying to figure out where the right space for it. I'll tell you another thing. There were some parents that were angry, furious that these things were being switched on them and very upset. And unfortunately, our hands were tied. We couldn't change what their insurance company was sort of dictating. So like you said, the rollout initially was hard, and it made it difficult, I think, on everybody because there wasn't a lot of education around it. I do feel a lot more comfortable now. And now, shortly we're going to have a injectable biosimilar, right? And you already do worldwide. I know, when I originally looked at some of this stuff, like India, for example, has like 6 or 7 Remicade biosimilars, a handful of Humira biosimilars already. And so there are countries around the world that have utilized as a way to hopefully increase access for patients.
I think for people who are listening, the cost savings piece, okay? Obviously, I told you the DoD at one institution cost savings, about 2.5 million is what we got. So in like the civilian side, have you noticed it, or have people come and told you, oh yeah, like my co-pays are lower, or have you done internal studies or looked at it and said that there is a cost savings? Like we actually are seeing in our system, in pediatric IBD in Arizona, that we are actually seeing that, okay, I flipped it because you told me a cost savings, or is it going to the payer?
Yeah, I don't know that. That's a great question. That was also similarly when I was originally in Dallas, when the first Remicade biosimilar came out. Like you said, it was the same thing for us because we were a certain designated hospital that got the best pricing because of taking care of children that were on Medicaid, on government insurance. Because we did that, so we got the cheapest. So there wasn't actually any savings in doing it. Yeah. But I don't know now, and probably something now that you say, I'm going to see if our pharmacists can actually look up some data for us.
Yeah.
Can I ask you guys a science question?
Sure.
And I realize this isn't exactly the same thing, but back when I used to work with folks with mental health conditions, and this was, early 2000s. So they had just come out with a generic for Prozac, and it was generic, not biosimilar. So, but granted, it's also a difference in medication. So I promise this is going to go somewhere. Anyway, but what had happened is that folks that were using Prozac for their OCD, the generic wasn't as effective as the brand name Prozac. So that just leads me to think like, okay, if we're talking about slight differences in the formulation of these drugs, I mean, obviously there's lots of European data that's showing that there isn't really that big of a deal, but I guess like how do these companies who produce the biosimilars really guarantee that they're getting enough correct that it's going to be exactly what the person needs?
That's exactly right. I mean, Anish and I saw that with like azathioprine and Imuran. There would be people that swore that brand name Imuran is the only thing that worked for them. You put them on generic azathioprine or something else that didn't work. But we don't know that. And even though like the European data that we're talking about, at least in pediatrics, we're talking about studies with maybe a few hundred kids in it. Like you're not talking about like the number of actual use, the bigger denominator of all the patients that have actually used it. And then, we're a couple of years in. What about durability, long-term safety data? Is that, we don't know that. And I think that's the other thing that worries people like Anish and I, that we don't necessarily know, down the road. We don't have the 20-year experience that we have with Remicade. We don't have that with the biosimilar.
Yeah, and I think part of it too is when you actually look at kind of the FDA pathway, where it's all extrapolation data, meaning that you did it in some sort of realm of a disease state that's very similar to each other. Like like RA, for example. Okay. So a lot of the drugs that we use in IBD really were extrapolated from the RA population. So if you do a study in RA with a biosimilar, you can extrapolate it as, okay, well, our TNF drug is very similar to Remicade. So the assumption is that across the platforms, again, from RA to wherever you want to use it, UC, Crohn's, it's the same. So your efficacy should be at the same. You're extrapolating data. So you're just molding it to another one. But this is where the cost makes a difference, is because you don't have to spend hundreds of $millions of R&D for every single disease state. So this is where your cost difference is. This is where the FDA has a stringent pathway for approvals of biosimilar. One, you have to show that there is a biosimilar, meaning that it works very similar to the originator project. So your biosimilar has to be very similarly working in different platforms like the originator product, like a Remicade or something, like Humira, wherever you want to do it at. So the stringent process, the FDA has that to prove that. Then you have to do like 1 or 2 studies in some sort of disease state. Again, RA is easier to recruit. Like, Ashish can tell you, recruiting for a UC or Crohn's trial is very difficult. You need hundreds of sites. Like an RA trial, you may need 50 sites and you get the population. So you can enroll faster in some of these other disease states. So you do it in one disease state, you get your numbers, you get your positivity, then you extrapolate it out saying, okay, yeah, well, it worked in RA. Remicade did too. So we're just assuming in UC and Crohn's work the same. You're going to start seeing now, like the Europeans are doing studies directly in IBD stuff now, like UC and Crohn's. A lot of your 5-year data is out of the Europeans. The Americans, we don't have as much robust data on some of the biosimilars. Again, we're also late. Americans are late in the game because of all the trust issues, of all the, whether it be some power politics in the pharma companies, who knows in America how it won, but we're a little bit slower. But I'll tell you, like all my European counterparts that I've met, and my mentors at Mount Sinai, Jean-Fred was my biggest mentor, and he flat out was pissed off that America, he's in France, like for years before I got to Sinai, they were using biosimilars already. So he was pissed off, why not use it in America? But I think there was one. So I think where you're getting at, Alicia, going back to where you're at, there's no difference like Synthroid and the thyroid hormones. Like Synthroid is a brand name product, and then you have the generic product. But people will swear by Synthroid works better than the generic product. And then now, is it because whatever it's compounded with is decreasing the efficacy rates? That we can never prove that, because that's a bit different than generic. Generic, the compound's the same, but what it's mixed in is different. How it's formulated into the pill is different. So biosimilars is going to be the same way. Like, she made a good point. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. We have no idea. But and we'll get to this later on tonight, is that the paradigm of how we treat IBD is changing. So is it going to matter in 10, 20 years? I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that one is. Do I need 20-year data on Renflexis? I don't know. The arsenal looks so much nicer, and you see it's getting better in Crohn's. Your TNFs are probably going to be 4th, 5th line if you need it. So I think that is a concern. I think the safety data there. But again, if you're in the assumption board, what we're doing already, the assumption that safety is going to be about the same as Remicade has, is what I would assume.
And it's nice to see that this study in particular, and looking at Europeans, that it is still effective for it. So moral of this, despite all of this talk, is that they seem to be very effective still. Yes?
Yeah. Yep. We've been using Renflexis, and I haven't batted an eye. I haven't seen a detriment in the care of my patients. They're still getting top line care. The drugs are still working in the patient population we put them on. Is still working very, very well, just like the originator. Like I don't see an efficacy difference with it personally.
Are we moving on?
We can move on.
We're moving on. This one, I feel like lies more with you, Ashish,
especially considering he wrote the paper.
I wasn't going to just go straight from there. I wasn't just going to start with that.
Let's not overstate it. There's probably a couple of people listed ahead of me on the header.
Yeah.
But you're the more important one at all of them.
That's right. Would you like to tell us
here
about the work? Okay. That's right. You're here. They're not here. So please tell us about the work that you did that no one else helped you with, and the paper that you published, please.
That's funny. So I think that one of the other topics we wanted to talk about a little bit is, I think probably the bigger umbrella is this idea of personalized medicine in IBD. That's a huge hot button topic, like try to figure out how can Anish and I know that the patient that I scoped a couple hours ago, newly diagnosed with IBD, how do I know how to treat them tomorrow or when I get the biopsies back, whatever? How do I know how to move forward with their therapy? And, when I started doing this 20 years ago, it wasn't better. It was simpler because there was only 1 or 2 things to do. Now we live in an era that there's been an incredible amount of discovery in IBD, leading to a lot of new therapeutics and drugs and treatments. But that gain in knowledge has now left us with a little bit of uncertainty in saying, okay, hey, is this person going to be best treated with a TNF? Or will this one do okay on mesalamine? Does this one need, Entyvio or vedolizumab first line? And so there's been a lot of thought and emphasis on that, starting actually the RISK study, right? So the RISK study was a study funded by the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation that tried to take just all new diagnoses, all comers, and basically follow them out for 2, 3, 5, over time. And Dr. Subra Kugathasan at Emory was the PI in that, and there were many centers, including ours, that participated. But that started identifying what are some of the true risk factors that lead to progression of disease, and maybe we can start using those. This paper, the one that we're talking about now, which is, I'll read you the title, Clinical and Host Biological Factors Predict Colectomy Risk in Children Newly Diagnosed with Ulcerative Colitis. And the lead author and the primary investigator in that study was Jeff Hyams. And Jeff is a colleague, and he was involved with RISK as well. And he is up in the Northeast in Connecticut. And he's thought a lot about sort of this evolution and thinking about how do we figure out better how to treat patients. So the PROTECT study enrolled newly diagnosed ulcerative colitis patients and said, hey, take those patients, treat them as you would normally treat them, use your standard of care. And then what we have tried to collect now over the lifespan of PROTECT, which is still looking at data as it goes further and further out, is to try to understand, going back and looking at what are some of the predictors that you might have been able to see at that first visit that predict some sort of either escalation, progression. In this case, this paper that was in inflammatory bowel diseases just recently, February 2022, was trying to say, okay, what are the factors that predict you having to have your colon taken out, right? The ultimate treatment for ulcerative colitis, right? The essentially only curative therapy we have in ulcerative colitis is to actually take out the organ. So what predicts that risk, right? They did a really, really nice job of looking at a variety of different features, from clinical features, things like PUCI, the Pediatric Ulcerative Colitis Activity Index. If you had a PUCI that was greater than 65 at diagnosis, you had a higher risk of having your colon taken out at some point in your disease course. And now for like Improved Care Now, which is the big pediatric database, we actually asked that as one of the checkpoints, that did this patient at any point in their disease process have a PUCI of greater than 65? Because it should then heighten your awareness to say, this is a more serious phenotype of disease, right? We talk about phenotypes of disease and genotypes, right? Then the other things they looked at are, like things like ESR and CRP, other serological markers. And then they added in potentially some genetic markers, HLA typing and things like that have been associated potentially with higher risk of severe disease or progression to colectomy. And then looked at some microbiome signatures as well. That, okay, hey, if this person has XYZ signature at the beginning of their disease, does that maybe predispose them? And so if you can know that and learn that at the beginning, or look for those signs at the beginning, what does that help me and Anish do at the beginning? Is to think about, hey, maybe the mesalamine is not the right therapy for this child at the beginning. I know that they have a higher risk of progressing, and so treat them with a more appropriate medicine. This is a big, Anish, this is a big point that I used to always make to the fellows, and we're starting our fellowship here, and they'll probably hear me say it 1,000 times, that antiquated is this idea of step-up therapy or escalating therapy, right? Yep. You should treat the patient in front of you. Yep. But that's very hard because we don't know the features of those patients. And that's what studies like this are doing, is trying to help us identify features of patients so you enter their therapeutic journey at the appropriate, not think of it like a pyramid, which is what we used to do, but think of it as, how do I treat the patient and the type of disease that's sitting in front of me?
Yeah, I think your study, and I commend you and your colleagues to do it. I mean, because I think this is where IBD is going, right? I think this is the whole part of precision medicine. I know me and Alicia had a text message string about precision medicine. I think this is where it's going, and studies like this help it. Is that finding that, the ultimate goal, I'm hoping in maybe, 10 years, that if I get diagnosed with IBD, I just get a blood test done, and so give me the full genetic signature of my disease, and I can tailor a drug right to that disease. Right, similar to what HIV is done. Right, similar. HIV right now, you pull the blood, and bam, you have a full signature of the HIV, the virus, and you can pick and choose drugs, combo drugs, whatever you want to do. And I think studies like this one help bring this into fruition. They're tough studies to do, But so my question for you, Ashish, with this one is that outside of the clinical scoring one, did you guys? And I'm actually looking at the paper right now. So the gene signatures was like a set standard one that you guys use for both the mRNA sequencing part of it and also the genetic profiles? Was like a basic standard. And number two is in that one, was there a certain gene signature that you saw that, okay, this patient comes with acute UC, inpatient, I get this panel done. Oh, this one, oh, damn, this person has whatever gene it is. I need to put them on like aggressive Remicade. I'm not playing this game with like half-assing with some mesalamine and kind of playing the pyramid game. Did you guys kind of see something like that when your guys stuff like clinically, like, and this, well, here, I'll give you a third part of it too. I'm going to be a loaded question here. Where do you see this clinically?
Yeah.
Like, do you see this something, obviously not prime time yet, but where do you see it aligning itself in clinical scenario?
Yeah, I think those points are exactly right. I mean, I think that a couple of things that showed up. So they used a lot of that HLA antigen genotyping, and laboratories. Well, you and I have seen it with Prometheus. Prometheus loves looking at all those HLA typings, and it has the ability to do that. Sometimes expensive, starting to become a little bit more accessible. Those are some of the haplotyping that they did as well, because they had seen in a previous cohort, also in PROTECT, that there was a couple of haplotypes that put a patient at higher risk of severe disease. And then they went back and looked at that and said, okay, is there in the colectomy group versus non-colectomy group, were there other of those HLA variables? And so, if you could draw that, again, similarly, if you could draw that at the beginning in a panel and say, yes, hey, this patient is HLA type, that predicts a higher risk. The one that they used here was this HLA DRB1.
Yeah, I saw DRB
0103. Yeah. So if you're positive for that, then again, do you increase heightens your suspicion that this patient has a higher risk of progressive and aggressive disease, and that you need to modify your therapy to address that as one of the variables, regardless of what they look like today. Yeah. Because what we do now, this looks mild. I just treat them with mesalamine. But you and I know we have mild patients that end up with a colectomy in a year, and we have severe patients that are on mesalamine for 10 years and never bother you.
Exactly.
And so I agree. It's trying to figure out where that patient is going to be. And for us, maybe it's lucky or not, but we do see colectomy, but we don't see colectomy probably at the rate that you guys see it, because they grow out of our practice. So that kid that looked at mild or moderate, and he sort of, did fine for 10 years, and then he went to an adult. I don't know. I don't get that immediate feedback of what happened to them after they've had 20 years or 30 years or 60 years of disease. Yeah. And that's where I think that this could be very helpful. The other thing, they even took, they looked at some biopsy samples initially, and they were like, okay, if they have a high level of rectal eosinophilia,
I saw that in there.
It also predicts that they're going to have a more serious type of disease. That was hilarious, because that actually came up as a question on our MOC for our board exam. So they incorporated, stuff like this about prediction of disease. And so I think we just need more of this. And like you said, it's not prime time yet. We're not using it because I think there are still so many variables. And every time we sort of figure out maybe a variable that predicts, on the flip side, we add 3 new drugs. And then we're like, oh, wait, what does this mean?
We're going to do with it.
What does this mean? What is this? Maybe at first it would be like, oh, mesalamine or TNF. Well, if they have this HLA, then I'm going to definitely use a TNF. Yeah. Now, do I use a TNF or a alpha 4 beta 7 or a IL-12/23? Like what? I think we're going to, like you said, in the next decade, I'd love to see this be honed in areas where you're actually looking at bringing therapeutics into this equation, right? In this study, again, the intent was treat them like you would treat them, and then let's look back. But that makes it a very long course. Figure out what's going on. But now, as you learn more and we get more therapies, can there be things that actually affect or improve certain therapies? Dr. Dubinsky does a really great an pediatric IBD fellows conference every year. And one of the articles we looked at in that is another HLA typing that Prometheus does do now that has been shown to be associated with a higher risk of TNF failures. So Prometheus is going back and looking at some of that internally. And so they say, okay, hey, if I have that typing at the beginning, the literature suggests if you have that HLA typing, if it's positive, then you have a higher risk of either losing response or having an adverse response to TNF. So the thought process should be at the beginning, do I use high dose TNF or do I just use something different than a TNF?
Yeah.
That's where I think it really starts becoming really valuable to you and I.
Oh yeah. No, I agree. I think it's where we're going to see IBD going. Yeah.
I have two questions for you. Actually, that actually might be part of it. My first question is, so the risk study was looking at Crohn's disease. This study was looking at ulcerative colitis. Are we able to extrapolate from these studies into the adult community? So will this eventually become something that can translate up to our people that are older getting it diagnosed? Or is there something about being diagnosed as a child that makes this more relevant? That's number one. And if part of what we're looking at is that certain genotypes respond differently to medications, like you're just talking about, this one predicts TNF failure, is this something that now the drug companies are looking at in their clinical trials as part of like trying to figure out, okay, this is how we can make this marketable to this specific group of people? So I'm curious if this is now translating into clinical trials as well.
I'll answer the first one. I'll let Anish grab the second one. So the first one for us, as we think about these in pediatrics, there's, you're exactly right. I think that it can, to a certain extent, and will to a certain extent translate to adults at some point in a couple of situations. Well, number one, Anish might see a patient that's been having symptoms for 10 years and they were a child when they had the symptoms, or they're doing well, they were in maintenance for a long time, and then they flare and show up to him, but their disease was diagnosed in pediatrics. There's certainly a belief that there are unique features of pediatric disease and that it tends to be more aggressive and progressive. Maybe that's not the right way to say it. Probably both of those things, because it has a longer duration to be in that patient, right? So just the lifetime, the load of disease eventually probably leads to some of these complications that they're seeing in adults, not just the fact that they were diagnosed as kids, but that they had disease for 60 years. But I do think that some of it will be translatable into the adult population. I think also as we learn about this in the pediatric population, that maybe also that translates to adult specific studies that are looking at the same thing, like we often do in pediatrics. More often than not, we steal these ideas from our adult colleagues that, hey, that's interesting, they looked at it that way. Why don't we look at that way in peds? And so maybe some of this translates up. It's always the genetic and HLA and all that stuff has always been focused in kids because the kids are a quote cleaner population. When they are diagnosed at a younger age, they have less impact of environment and smoking and drinking and eating crap, and they have less impact of that, so that when they have disease at a young age, it's thought to be that there may be more of a monogenic or a genetic component to their disease.
Yeah, I think a lot of the pediatric stuff, it's laying the foundation. Essentially, all these like studies lay foundations, and they can extrapolate to adult. I mean, the adults are doing that. I mean, there are studies in adult. I can't off the top of my head rattle off a bunch of them, but I think part of it is just like Ashish said, it's a cleaner population to see in the pediatrics, because we all know this in adulthood. Right now I'm drinking a beer. I don't see a 5-year-old drinking a beer. Well, I hope and pray there's not a 5-year-old drinking beer with that one. But there's a lot of extra environmental factors that we can't account for. This is part of the epigenetics where some environmental factors changing your genes acutely as opposed to chronically, like in the pediatric population. So I think these studies lay foundations for us to start extrapolating and seeing that data. The second line, the clinical trials, so in clinical trials, they are collecting, like you can get consent, patient can get consented as a second part. It's not truly part of the actual study itself, like for a drug, but they consent patients to, and some studies will do this one, consent patients to hold their blood. For studies like what Ashish is doing, is like in the future, if something comes out like a genetic marker or some genetic study comes out, can that company use that blood sample to do it? So they are consenting them for it if you're willing to do it. Patients don't have to do it, but a lot of our patients, like in our clinical trials, they do it because it's something that can help the future at some point. It's kind of what their thoughts are. But the clinical trials don't have actively, but they are saving blood just in case, like a study like Ashish is, or some company comes in there and says we want to do a study with you. They are collecting blood to do this kind of stuff.
All right. Before we hit record, we were talking about some other things that were happening in the world. And you guys were talking about the use of ultrasound at bedside to be helpful in lots of different aspects of disease. So let's talk about that. Yeah.
So the kind of conversation that we had right before we started, Ashish brought up a great idea about looking at, and this is something we're going to start seeing more in the literature. The Europeans started this, looking at small intestinal ultrasound. So essentially taking a regular ultrasound machine that you do for gallbladders or whatever it is for obstetrics, and using that to look at the small intestine, like especially really you're looking at Crohn's patients. It might extrapolate to UC at some point, looking at colon, but you're looking at someone who has like small intestinal ileal disease, and especially point of care. It's looking at, do they have a stricture right then and there? Can we, and nicely, you can follow them and it's safe, non-invasive. You throw an ultrasound on them right then in clinic if you're trained in it, and you can over time follow them without having to do expensive MRIs, radiation, excessive CT scans, excessive colonoscopy, which costs a lot of money, but also is not very quality of life for a patient. So this is what small intestinal imaging is helping. Europeans they have protocols in place. It's starting to extrapolate now to the US now. I know, so Mount Sinai Hospital, where I train IBD at, they're leading the diagnostic testing in this one, getting people more in the US population trained in this, because it is a set and training process. I mean, it's not something where a regular ultrasound tech can do this one, because imaging is a little bit different. It's a little bit, I mean, especially for gastroenterologists, like GI docs like me and Ashish. Are you kidding me? I mean, you would ultrasound on somebody, I'm like, what the hell is that? I have no freaking idea what I'm looking at. Minus a liver. I can find a liver. But if you look at me and make a look at like intestine, I don't know what the heck I'm looking at. It's a big learning curve. I think in the long run, it's going to behoove us and big IBD centers and in practices to have this available, because literally point of care testing. This is something where you can give instant satisfaction. You can put them on someone like a drug. Like you diagnose them on a Monday with ileal disease, and you can do an ultrasound at 0.0, and then you can do it 4 weeks later, 6 weeks later, 8 weeks later, and see the progression. Seeing is that information getting better without having to do, because I mean, it's also cheaper from a managed care standpoint. I mean, insurance companies are not fighting for an MRI or CT scan. I mean, I can't, I mean, Ashish, I know you're probably fighting for like just a basic MRI on someone. It's a nightmare to fight for just a basic imaging study. When ultrasound, you have it in your office, you don't have to fight for it. And it's reimbursed. So I think there's a huge role for it. And I think in pediatrics is where you're going to see a lot more data coming in pediatrics too. Europeans are doing a lot of pediatrics because it's very easy. Like trying to put a kid through a scanner, like we had to do my own child. Oh my God, oh good Lord. That is like a shit show. Pardon my French. But it is a nightmare. I mean, sedation, like all, I mean, it's like literally a show just to get him in for like a 10-minute scan, as opposed to ultrasound, pop, pop, boom, have a nice day, we're done. That one. So I think this is where you're going to start seeing more point of care testing, especially in imaging, go to this route, especially for Crohn's. UC, it's still fuzzying in UC because it's very hard to kind of get colon pictures and that kind of stuff. I mean, kind of idolize it, but you know, in San Antonio at BAMC, we're looking at getting trained and doing this one. So we'll be the first military ever doing this one to do this point of care testing, to give that like acute stuff and also offload the MRI and CT scanners and also limit CT scans. I know Ashish, I mean, people get scanned like, you know, I mean, adult, geez, I mean, you see some 18-year-olds, 20-year-olds, they've already gotten 10 CT scans in the ER. I mean, you look at the amount of radiation they get, I mean, essentially you can cause a lymphoma. If you look at like a 3-year-old gets to adulthood, I mean, a lot of these people have already had 15, 20 scans done. And now in adulthood, they're going to even get more. This is a huge area. And I want to see what your thoughts are on like the pediatric side of the house with it.
Yeah, very, very similar. And like you know, when I heard about this first, when Michael Dullinger and Marla Dubinsky presented it at Congress, at Crohn's and Colitis Congress early this year, just immediately, you know, shot them a message and said, you know, how do we figure out how to do this?
Yep.
And we've continued that conversation. I know, like you said, you're going to send someone to be trained. We're planning on sending someone in the fall as well, because it does definitely take some training and learning, because to me, it looks just like a broken TV set in the 80s, right? It just, you know, it's just fuzz. I probably couldn't even find the liver. That's actually impressive. And so they're like, that's the heart, sir.
Yeah. That's pumping. That's weird.
The liver is pulsatile. So I think this started when first MRE came to the table, right? Like, and we said, like you said, the amount of radiation exposure in these IBD patients, you know, I know there was some early literature that talked about just the cumulative exposure by the time a patient was 50 or 60 was similar to some of the, you know, I saw an old statement, and I don't know where this is from or how long ago, but it's similar to like Hiroshima, Nagasaki survivors. Like they had that much radiation exposure by the time they were in their 5th and 6th decade of life.
No way.
IBD patients, because of the amount of CTs and x-rays that they were just getting for evaluating their disease. So that was a big push for MRE, right? Which was really nice. But Anish and I both sent patients to MRE. It's expensive. It takes time. It requires patients to drink a lot of contrast in a short period of time to get good distension of the gut, of the intestines. And so it's sometimes really hard for our kids. And sometimes in the younger kids, I got to put them to sleep. I got to put an NG down and fill their gut, you know, with the contrast.
They ain't sitting still.
it still takes a lot of effort. And this idea of using, like Anish said, point of care testing, point of care ultrasound, we essentially have it in your office, you're bringing them in, you're doing it, and you're, especially in small bowel Crohn's disease, you're looking at bowel inflammation, you're looking at if there's thickening, if there's evidence of inflammation. The other really neat thing I heard when I heard them present it is that they felt like it improved the patient's experience, and their understanding. What is that called? Their medical, like, a lot of times we talk over patients' heads, or we really try to bring it so they understand.
So more of their literacy, the kind of understanding.
Literacy, thank you. The health literacy. It really improved their health literacy, and it made them, actually, when they were doing it, he talked about how it improved their health literacy because they understood what was going on, the process that was going on, what they were seeing, what we were talking about when we said inflammation, and it made them better partners in their therapy because when they come in for serial exams, they saw that it was getting better, or they saw that it wasn't. And so it led to better engagement and better health literacy. And that, to me, is just as big as sort of this access and the information it's giving us. It's also so much that it's actually giving the patients and families. So I'm really excited about it. And I think that, like Anish said, we try to learn and get trained. And, it's not taking away from even radiologists. It actually, like they were talking about, like, it actually helped them identify patients that needed to go to MRE that might not have gone to MRE to get evaluated because they were sort of, smoldering along or didn't have any major symptoms. So I think it's a really great opportunity to impact care with very little harm.
I love that this improves health literacy. I think that's super cool that, when you're showing people what's going on, they're like, oh, I get it, because it can feel so overwhelming and like you can't understand it. So I think that's really cool. So Ashish, you have to leave us here in just a minute. So I'm going to give you very fast. The other topic that we were going to talk about is new therapies.
10 questions in a minute.
Exactly. Rattle them all off. So we were going to talk about new therapies. So in the pediatric space, what is new and exciting coming down the pipeline?
So, I think actually Anish and I could probably do a whole other podcast on just new therapies, but
you are always welcome back. You know that.
I think it goes back to what I said at the beginning. When I started doing this, started fellowship in 2003, and then really it was like steroids, Imuran, maybe some drugs like methotrexate, tacrolimus, and really thick cyclosporin and really sick kids. But our armamentarium was really limited. And then, we got the TNFs, and then we would not even treat patients with TNF because we wanted to save it until they were really sick. And that's not how you treat. We know now that's not how you treat disease. You should be proactive about treatment. And so, certainly we've moved from the TNFs, which you have the anti-TNF class of drugs, to drugs that work in different areas. And so in pediatrics right now, we still only have pediatric FDA approval for the TNF, but we still use some of these medications off label. So like the alpha-4 beta-7 integrin inhibitor, otherwise known as Entyvio or vedolizumab, which is a unique drug because it's thought to work gut specific, so that the blockade of white blood cell recruitment is occurring just in the gut. So that's, a lot of people think, is really kind of the holy grail of therapy, is that because so many of the therapies are systemic drugs, is how do we get drugs to where they need to go so that they don't have systemic immunosuppression, they're getting targeted immunosuppression. The IL-12, 23 inhibitors, Stelara or ustekinumab is the other one that's out now that has both an adult Crohn's and ulcerative colitis indication, but again, no pediatric indication. We use both of those right now in our patient population. I think where we're, at least in pediatrics, are more on the cusp of is learning a little bit more about the oral therapies. And now some of the newer therapies that even have new targets. So there were the IL-12, 23 is ustekinumab together. Now they're separating out those two, IL-12 and IL-23 separately, and looking at both of those as individual targets. They're also looking at a target called S1P, which is another oral drug. The brand name is Zeposia. What is the trade name? Ozanimod. Thank you. So that's also an oral drug, but targeting a different pathway of inflammation, right? So S1P modulation. And so what I'm most excited about It's just this idea that there are all of these new therapeutic targets. And it's exciting on one hand. And on the other hand, it's a little overwhelming because now all of a sudden we're left with, oh, doctor, which one should I use? And we're not quite, at least in pediatrics for sure, we're not quite equipped yet to say that. And so some of it is still hey, we know we have the most clinical experience with TNFs. We know they have rapidity of response, that their overall long-term safety is good. They have good durability. They lead to steroid-free remission. Those are still goals that we try to achieve for our patients. And we know the TNFs do that really well. So in my practice, still a TNF is the first line therapy for both Crohn's disease and depending on the ulcerative colitis patient. But then we are doing that. And, right now we're getting ready to start a couple of clinical trials with these newer agents and trying to get some pediatric data. I'll leave this part, and I know I got to get off in a couple of minutes, but just the world of therapeutics is expanding. But we've been also trying to make a lot of effort, both to the FDA and to who writes the rules for the FDA, our governmental leadership, and to the companies. And companies, I think, are a little bit hand-tied by what the FDA says and what leadership says. So not as much to them, but using them as things that when new therapies come to market, they need to come to trials in both pediatric patients and adult patients simultaneously.
I agree.
And we've always said, we don't want to try it on kids because, they're an at-risk patient population. But then you're essentially leaving us to do it outside of trials, which is what we do. We treat patients with Entyvio and Stelara, even though there's not a pediatric indication. It's off-label, but it's because it's in the best interest of the patient. We have a frank discussion with our families and parents. We want to be partners in their therapy. But help us better arm ourselves with the ability to do that by starting these trials in both those patient populations, because it really would be a game changer. And I said this to someone before, is like, you worry so much about the side effects of these medicines. Go read the side effect thing of TNFs. Like half the thing is like congestive heart failure and kidney failure and renal disease and neuropathy. Like that doesn't happen in peds. Those are all things that happen in adults. Those are all side effects that happen in adults. Like it's actually probably a safer population to a certain extent to test some of these medicines in, again, in the proper setting and after they've had some of the initial PK and all that data done, but help us bring those therapies to the pediatric population at the same time that we bring them to adults. And if someone's out there listening that can help us achieve that would be my last ask. No, maybe, okay, not last ask. The last ask for today. That would be the last ask for today. But that would be an ask, is that, we got to do that. We got to bring these therapies to pediatrics when we bring them to adults.
I'm pretty sure that Robin and I are on the watch list, so maybe they are listening. Who knows?
Perfect.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Even better.
Yeah.
Ashish, thank you so much for joining us.
Anish and I are too, but probably for different
Probably
reasons.
now. I've out a couple companies already. I'm sure
Anish has military clearance. I'm just going to get stopped every time now.
Don't worry. You have the same last name. They'll just assume you're me. You're just me. Act like me. It's okay. With it.
Well, if I could get a copy of your military ID, I won't use it at TSA. I just would use it at hotels.
Very smart.
You can use it to get on the plane faster too. American Airlines get you on there faster. So I mean, Southwest too. They support military, so you can get it to get 10% discounts everywhere. I'd be more than happy to. Easy.
Well, I'm gonna let Anish answer that question as well, as he sees it in adults.
Your turn.
Yeah, I mean, so from the adult standpoint, Ashish hit the mark with all the drugs coming out. I mean, it is frustrating, and I think I see that because unfortunately, I treat some of the patients that transitioned over, and they didn't have access to the stuff that we have on the adult side. Outside of the ones that she's talked about, I mean, the other one, the JAK inhibitors, which kind of work at the cell level and kind of block the pathways from happening. So we have new drug came out with that one. I mean, Xeljanz is there. And then a new one, so tofacitinib is a generic name. The new one just got approved a couple of weeks ago, and UC was upadacitinib or Rinvoq. Again, same class of drugs. Rinvoq has a cleaner safety profile, but these armamentarians, I'll tell you, in our IBD center, for us, and we're very lucky, don't get me wrong, compared to kind of civilian sector and private practice, is that I get the pick of the litter.
So what you're saying is people should just join the military for better care?
Yeah.
Or, I mean, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Except for you can't join the military if you have IBD.
This is true.
Or marry somebody who is in the military.
Marry someone who's in the military.
Marry someone in the military. And you have access to us. But I think the nice part too, so we get We're lucky enough to get early access to these drugs, but from the oral therapy standpoint, we can align how we do the drugs. I mean, so we're very lucky where we can put some of the infusions in the back burner, have access to these oral therapies, and our success rate's been pretty good. I mean, new therapies, I mean, we have a hand selected few on the new drug symposia that Ashish kind of mentioned, and some of the new JAK inhibitors. We have a lot of stuff going on. And plus, the nice thing too is in the adult side, we're down doing consortium work with all this stuff. So myself and a bunch of other big IBD centers in the country, all of us are getting together and putting our data together and making real world experiences. So really kind of to give people what's in reality. It's because what happens at Ivy Towers doesn't happen in reality. But who studies most of this stuff? The Ivy Towers. Ivy Tower dictates how you do stuff. So now you can say who your Ivy Towers are. I'm not going to mention names, but 80% of the population who has IBD is not seen at an Ivy Tower. So access, and again, and the nice thing with the military, I'm in between. I'm between Ivy Tower and I'm in between the civilian sector. So I had the sweet spot with that one. So the or they're nice. I mean, I think it's very nice to start seeing pharma putting money towards this disease. But it's 1% of the population. So you're looking at maybe a couple million people. So it's not like tens of millions of people are getting this disease. We'd never hoped that, but you're seeing a lot of pharma money going into this one. Just today, this year, we might have another 2 approvals, maybe more than one, more likely one. But you look at the pipeline's rich and UC and Crohn's, and you're looking at multiple, and they're going away from infusions. You're seeing a lot of these drugs becoming maybe an infusion with injectable maintenance or maybe oral therapies. So you're really changing the paradigm how you're treating IBD patients. So essentially, it's going to be the point where 10 years, you're going to take maybe 1 or 2 pills, have a nice day. Your IBD is going to be essentially, quote unquote, I'll never call it a cure, but you're essentially going to be feeling phenomenal with very little to no side effects. This is where we're going towards. And I think this is where the armamentarium, just like she says, is very confusing because where do you align them? How do you put them? How do you get them? I think payers are going to tell you, because it's going to be a payer-driven thing. It's like, they're going to tell you, oh, nope, sorry, you can get that drug. You can get this drug instead because it's cheaper for us. So I think that's going to be the fight, is getting the payers on board and getting guidelines in there where we're going to align these kind of drugs. I think that's where the big headache's going to come. Like when we get another 5 or 6 therapies on market, how am I going to choose?
Right.
I don't know. It's determined with what insurance the person has. But I think that's going to be the downfall of new therapies is going to be, is that this competition in the market makes things cheaper, but I mean, how do you align them? I don't know that answer.
But speaking of choosing medications for patients, even now you have a decent number to choose from. And obviously a lot of it rolls down to insurance, but I do not feel like I hear very much about the JAK inhibitors. So is there a reason that I don't hear them as much?
You're looking at some bad press to the FDA. I mean, so for example, so Xeljanz, so tofacitinib got a black box warning from the FDA for clot risk and cardiovascular risks, mostly coming from the RA population. So they're extrapolating out to anybody who uses it. So that whole class of drugs. So you're looking at not just Xeljanz, but now Rinvoq, brand spanking new drug, very little data, long-term data on that kind of stuff, has that black box warning. So any drug in that class is going to have black box. So you have essentially put a huge warning label on a drug class that, in my own personal opinion, I think they're very good drugs, but you're barred by that black box warning. So it's really having the conversation as a provider with the patient and really explaining the full details of it. And risk mitigation is it worth the risk, not worth the risk? I mean, now again, if I'm looking at an older person has tons of heart attacks or stroke, has arrhythmias, has no history of clots, I'm not using that class. I mean, it's, common sense. But now a younger person, active duty wise, I'll probably tell you active duty, we do a lot of oral therapies because it keeps them active duty. So I think we have a small area of need for these oral molecular therapies because it does allow these people to fight and stay in the army or the military, wherever they're in, and we fight to keep them in there with these drugs. But that's why JAK inhibitors, I think a lot of it you won't hear because comfort level from a GI provider is lower than some of the other drugs because they have long-term data. So once you stop a black box warning on a drug that was only available for a year and a half, maybe for UC, a brand new one 2 weeks ago just got approved, has a black box warning. So I think you kind of, pun intended, whether you box it into a little segment where you don't really want, you don't feel, I mean, if you're not an IBD person like myself or Ashish who do this as a daily, this is what I do. I see every day, I see IBD patients, as opposed to maybe another GI doctor that, maybe has a different practice where they're more general and they see maybe an IBD patient every couple of weeks or every months. The comfort level of getting a black box warning is not there because the black box warning always put a dent on stuff. Right. So that's why JAK inhibitors have a little bit of an issue because of black box warning.
All right, let's give you a theoretical patient.
Yeah.
Do you have a theoretical patient? This person has been doing Remicade, Humira, kind of the standard, starts for a lot of people, not working, still very symptomatic. You decide you're going to move on to the next step. It's either JAK inhibitor or it's like something like an Entyvio. why do you go which direction?
So a lot of it's going to be, part of the precision medicine part, which I think me and she kind of failed to kind of bring this up, was that is taking the consideration what the patient wants too. That's a huge one. And a lot of us forget about that one. I mean, this is what I preach to my fellows, is that it's the patient. You have to have that buy-in. You have to have the conversation with the patient. What do they want? Like, do you want an infusion or do you want an oral pill? That's the basic conversation and issue you have. So that helps. That obviously will guide you very easily. Now, really the big ones, and when she's kind of mentioned the pyramid stuff, kind of the old school method of like, you work from a salamines all the way up to the top and hope and pray they're not failing somewhere. So you're late in the game getting to biologic therapies, or even now the oral moleculars. What you start seeing now is the safety pyramids. The best talk I've ever seen who done this one is Dr. Miguel Reguera at Cleveland Clinic. He does a phenomenal talk on looking at the pyramid from a safety standpoint. So you really look at that one. So if you look at drugs across the board, like Entyvio, the safety profile is proven. I mean, you have long-term safety data, which is a very clean, nice drug. The next level ones, you have Stelara, Zeposia, the S1Ps that kind of she mentioned. They're the kind of top of the line rungs of safety. JAK inhibitors, because of the black box warning, whether or not you have safety or not issues with it, that tends to go down a little bit lower. Then your TNFs go down lower because of safety triggers, that kind of stuff. So really, in a patient like that one is a conversation with them, what they want. Number two is going to be looking at safety. If you're like in your 70s and 80s, I'm probably not going to do a JAK inhibitor or S1Ps, because your risk of getting a side effect, like an infection like that, is more detrimental to them than a 21-year-old. So that's big. So that one is more of an Entyvio patient. Now, if you're 21 years old and say you're active duty, I'm going to lean towards the JAK inhibitor because I can keep your active duty status with that one. Now, if none of those matter, it's really going to look at, do they have any other, like we call extraintestinal symptoms? Are they having any symptoms outside of their colon disease, like joint pains, headaches, eye issue, whatever? So that changes your therapy. If you have joint pains, JAK inhibitors are nice because they actually do work in the joints, because they're approved for other indications like RA, psoriatic arthritis, that kind of stuff. Entyvio doesn't have that joint penetration because, like as she said, it's very gut-directed, gut sensitive. Now, if they just have bland old like usage just failing a TNF, I don't think Entyvio is unreasonable, or even JAK inhibitors. So it really is a big conversation. It's like a loaded question. It's really going to have like bringing all the risk factors together, but also having the one-on-one conversation with the patient. But really, in reality of all that is, what's the payer going to pay for? That's going to be your biggest one. And that's a frustrating part that, I am starting to deal with it more with TRICARE, with some headaches with TRICARE. I think Ashish deals with it more because payers don't come on board fast enough. And I think that's the detriment to patients when the insurance companies don't want to buy in or don't want to come in early on these drugs, because you're going to essentially set the patient up for complications. So you're essentially paying more as opposed to paying, yes, drugs cost a lot. I mean, it is what it is. It's American life. But if you can align them appropriately in the patient, you risk mitigated maybe 5 years worth. I mean, hospitalization, colectomy, that's about $1 million. I mean, so as opposed to a drug that might cost $30,000 a year, I mean, your return on investment is positive. I think the main issue with drug choice is really going to be pharma. Pharma needs to fight insurance companies with us. And it's a thing. And with it, I think that's a big one.
I will tell you this, even after insurance companies have approved my treatment, every 12 months when it has to be renewed, we still have to get denied.
Yep.
Have to appeal because my dosage is higher and more often than like what is standard. So every time I reach out to my doctor early, I'm like, hey, have you resubmitted this? Because they're going to deny it and you're going to have to appeal it and I don't want to be late. And so even in that situation, there's still a fight every year. I know they're going to have to deny and then appeal every year.
I think that's a frustration. I mean, you deal with it firsthand. I mean, so you're dealing with it as a patient. So you're even more stressed, more worried because it's your body. Now, if you look at the provider side, it's frustrating because then I have to do an appeal. I have to talk to someone doctor, or the office has to sit there and do the PA form. Like they literally had to go through months probably of doing this stuff onerously just to get somebody to finally say yes, even though the drug's working for you. So I think that's a frustrating part, and that'll twist the different side of the questions you had initially, Alicia. Is that I think it's a team game, and the problem is right now there's no team. It's really pharma drives one side, insurance drives the other side, and who's going to pay the best.
Feels like a giant game of chicken, really. It's like we're driving at each other, and who's going to flinch, right?
Yep. And who's caught in between? Robin. I mean, essentially is, and Robin's caught in the middle of it, and the providers have no say. Like I have no, like if they deny it multiple, what am I going to do?
appeal. That's all you can do.
You denied it. Thank you for wasting my freaking time. And poor patient's going to suffer now. So now I had to go to the inferior drug, like go backwards. I mean, I had stories that people have gone backwards from biologics back to like immunomodulators, like azathioprine, 6-MP, because they quote unquote don't have a failure in it, but they were on a biologic already. So I've seen this happen. They go, I mean, just asinine backwards. So I think that's the thing. I think these new therapies they're going to change the paradigm or landscape of IBD. It's just that what's going to be the buy-in? Because right now, like you look at oral therapies, it's a slow uptake. I mean, Zeposia, Xelogen, and even Rinvoq is going to be a slow uptake in it because black box warning JAK inhibitors making it hard, but also payers. What are payers going to do? I mean, because it's new and the guidelines haven't. IBD guidelines, whether or not the payer follows them, I don't think they follow them all. It's going to be where they're going to line them. I think that's where we get frustrated.
Understandably frustrated because you're having to practice substandard medicine in your mind.
Yeah, like myself and Ashish, we don't do IBD because it's a moneymaker. Like it sounds stupid. I mean, Jesus Christ! Like and Robin, you can be the best. Yeah, you can call me a jerk for making this comment, but they're needy patients. We rightfully so. But I don't do it. Like I don't get I'm in the military for Christ's sakes. Okay. I mean, I'm not getting $1 million paycheck. Me and Ashish don't do it for the fame, the glory, or the money. It's the passion we have for it. But when you put a roadblock in this, it makes us frustrated because I literally am. I'm providing people substandard care because I know I can give you. I know it's going to work for you. Even the precision medicine stuff, phenomenal. Even if that comes to fruition, our insurance company is going to buy into it. Are they going to pay for this study? Number one, two is going to be if that study comes back and it's like 2 super expensive drugs, are they going to pay for it? I don't know. I have no idea. I mean, but I think we're not going to know until 10, 20 years from now when precision medicine really becomes, kind of mainstream, but it is. I mean, essentially it puts people like Robin and anybody else who's IBD in a conundrum for patients like people like myself and Ashish who have a passion doing this one. We love doing it. We're dedicated to doing it. I mean, and you all know us. We've been through Crohn's and colitis. We do a lot of stuff for Crohn's and colitis. We do a lot of stuff for patient advocacy stuff because this is what we do. This is what we want to do. We love doing what we do. But it is these newer therapies. I think give us hope. I think more hope for patients. I think these opportunities like Ashish's study was phenomenal. Colectomy rates. You're going to start seeing. We're hoping to start seeing these new therapies coming out. We're on board. Early therapies. I think something that we didn't mention in any of this stuff is like getting on treatment early. Is that do you really need to screw around with mesalamine? Like in Crohn's disease, why screw around with the other drug? Why not go straight to biological oral therapy? Because the data is there. That early targeted treatment. We're doing a study right now looking at that same concept in Crohn's and UC and the whole military database. They're looking at did early therapy help decrease complication rates in the future, and we're seeing it. I mean, at least early trigger on a database, we're starting to seeing it. That if you're aggressive early, you change your paradigm. So this is where I think it's coming through. These oral therapies, I'm hoping, and any new therapies coming on board, we can get them on board early, get access to them early, and also changes the price points. Is that when you have multiple competitors, when the juggernauts are gone, and the juggernauts go to biosimilars, you change your landscape. I think that's
I do think those studies that you're talking about where you're saying like we're seeing that we're able to track these people and that the aggressive quote unquote early treatment is having longer term better outcomes. That's what the insurance companies need to see because you then are able to say, well, that prevented this person from getting a colectomy or having lots of resections or all of these things. And granted, of course, they can say, well, you don't know that would have really happened for Robin, but you can make that argument a lot better to be able to say, well, look at all these people we have. And just by what we already know about these diseases, this many people would have needed surgeries that are very expensive. And these people, so that's what we need in order to
I mean, they're not blind to it. You can Dr. Google it and get the studies. I mean, the question is, do they want to?
They don't.
They don't. And what part of it too is part of like advocacy groups to kind of push that side. But how much are they going to listen? I mean, I'm sorry, but if a CEO of an insurance company wants a new yacht, he's not going to approve. I'm going to make up a drug. I mean, a brand new antibody drug that costs $50,000 a year and I need 100 patients on it. They're not going to approve it because he wants his yacht. So, I mean, you're at a battle of what's necessary and what's appropriate.
Right. But that's where you have to make that payment argument about like, if you spend a little money here, it's less money there kind of thing. And that you will.
It's slowly happening. I mean, you're starting to see slowly, like for example, Zeposia, for example, doesn't have step through. So you actually don't have to go through biologic therapy in order to get the Zeposia. However, Rinvoq does, and they're studied at the same time. So why does that need a TNF step through, but Zeposia doesn't need a step through? So I think the FDA part of it puts roadblocks in it too. Now again, I'm not part of the FDA process. I have no idea what they do behind closed doors. I have no idea, and what the decision points are. But I think there's a lot of roadblocks in that standpoint too. Is that when certain companies can pay for a drug to get expedited, or you can pay for certain drugs to get higher listings, that's a little shady in my mind. But again, I'm not a politician, nor am I part of the FDA. I'm just a little military dumb guy hanging out.
I feel like this is how we ended your episode too, is to be able to say, we're probably not going to change that system today.
Yeah, I think we did. I'm not gonna lie. I think we did. Essentially, it was bitching about a broken system that we know needs to be fixed, but we can't fix it. And we just settled in saying it is what it is.
And unfortunately, I think that's probably where we need to end today as well.
Yeah. I will tell you, my 2 takeaways are that I'm a needy patient, and I have enough radiation from all of the tests from Hiroshima. Is that what? That what? Yeah.
Essentially,
so, I'm looking forward. I'm looking forward to it. I'm being a needy patient, and then also having enough radiation.
So essentially, in 10 years, you might grow a finger in your head.
Oh, this is awesome.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that too. Yeah. So, perfect. This is a perfect way to end the show.
It'll just make texting faster, Robin. It's good.
Oh, this is true.
Exactly.
Yes.
Your finger can now work for your eyes. Very easy.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, Anish, thank you so much for joining us. We really always appreciate talking to you, but this was really fun to hear more about what's coming down the pipeline. So thank you.
Yes. Yeah, we definitely want to do it again in the future.
We hope you enjoyed our first research roundup. If you liked this episode, please rate, review, subscribe, and share with a friend. Thanks.